Got some scripture to read, and this is Paul's words to the first church, to the church at Thessalonica, the first letter that he wrote. Quickly, Paul goes and he founds this church, but is forced to leave very quickly. The people, the authorities, the religious authorities, the Jewish authorities didn't like the fact that he founded the church, so they ran him out of town. So this young sapling of a congregation, this very tender infancy stage of a group of faithful people were coming together, and so all of a sudden their leader has rushed out of town, and they just simply long for him to return. You feel that? Long for him to return. They want that stability. They want the comfort that Paul could give them. Timothy goes, the assistant, and they're like, no, that's not enough. We want Paul. And Timothy reports back to Paul and says, listen, they're doing well. They just need to be encouraged. And so Paul writes a letter and he comforts them, he encourages them, and he gives them thanks. And so this is the section we're going to read, the 5th chapter, beginning with the 12th verse. But we appeal to you, brothers and sisters, to respect those who labor among you and have charge of you in the Lord and admonish you. Esteem them very highly in love because of their work. Be at peace among yourselves. We urge you, beloved, to admonish the idlers, encourage the faint-hearted, help the weak, be patient with all of them. See that none of you repays evil for evil, but always seek to do to one another and to all goodness. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances. For this is the will of God in Jesus Christ for you. Do not quench the Spirit. Do not despise the words of the prophets, but test everything. Hold fast to what is good and abstain from every form of evil. And God add God's blessing to the reading and the hearing, to the understanding, and when necessary and appropriate, to the doing of God's holy word. Thanks be to God. Amen. So Paul was not the first to suffer for the faith. He was looking upon these new disciples, these first church here in Thessalonica, and he saw their suffering. He related it to his own suffering. He knew that he came from a people that suffered. First the Hebrews in the hands of the Pharaoh in Egypt, through years later through the prophets who would go and would speak a word to the people of correction. Words that they may or may not have wanted to hear. Words that got some of them killed. And then the ultimate suffering servant, Jesus, comes. God in the flesh, and he hangs on a cross, suffering in the form of capital punishment. And so from all of these situations, what Paul has learned and what he is desperately trying to teach those new people that have come to faith, that come to know Jesus, is that we give thanks in all of our circumstances, not just when it's convenient. Friends, we've had this sermon series planned for months. And on this day, we're supposed to give thanks. And I would say absolutely. Absolutely. For us to hear Paul's words that we give thanks in all our circumstances, because here's what we learned this week, that we are not alone when we suffer. We may think we're alone. In fact, we kind of like to be alone. We call those pity parties. Anybody like throwing pity parties? Those are a common occurrence in my household. I'm not just talking about my kids either. I'm definitely not talking about my wife, so don't be telling her I said that. We're not alone in our suffering. I think we were reminded of that this week. I hope you were reminded of that this week. I hope you opened eyes long enough. I hope you turned the crazy, especially national news media, off long enough to just simply experience a little bit of what went on in our community. We're not alone. even in spite of the bad stuff that happened. Again, Paul got this not from his own. He didn't come up with this on his own. Instead, he looked back at his history and he hung his hat on the fact that those who had gone before him had suffered and that he could endure as well. Here's what he turns to. He turns to prophets like Habakkuk. And we don't read a lot of Habakkuk in here, but the prophet Habakkuk writes in the 3rd chapter, though the fig tree does not blossom and no fruit is on the vines, though the produce of the olive fields fails, the fields yield no food, though the flock is cut off from the fold, although there is no herd in the stalls. I mean, are you kidding me? If there's any reason to give a pity party, it's that right there. Nothing's gone right in this man's life. And here's how he says, but I rejoice in the Lord. I will exalt in the God of my salvation. The prophet is thankful not because of his circumstances, but instead because the Lord is present in salvation. And we know that through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Our response should always be to live into what God has done by simply bringing us into being. Pinch yourself right now. You're alive. Pinch your neighbor because they might be falling asleep. They're alive. Things aren't right all the time, but we're alive. We're still here. And even when the world would believe otherwise, we believe in a kingdom eternal. We believe in a kingdom eternal. So here we are, together, 4 days after an incredible tragedy in our city, our faith, our common humanity, and those 9 saints, martyrs. That's what I'm hanging my hat on. Saints and martyrs right there. People who died for their faith. Because I've sat in Bible studies like that. I've had a Wednesday night Bible study at my previous church in a little tiny church in the middle of downtown. And we had some weird, crazy people walk into that Bible study. And we welcomed them in just as those people did. Those people were saints and martyrs. Died because they had a faith that begged them to live differently, and by all accounts they did. They made room for the stranger. And the response of their family, their church family, our town, our community, our city has been nothing but one of grace and peace. And it will continue to be so. There's been a question that's been bounced around a couple of different times, and you've probably heard this before. You may have even thought it. You're not wrong in thinking this question or asking this question, but it sounds a little bit something like this. How could this happen? And the easy answer for us is to say, I don't know. And I've said that all week long. I don't know. I don't know how somebody could do this. But I do know some other things, and this is going to make you a little bit uncomfortable because I'm getting a little prophetic here. Violence has been a part of our existence since Cain and Abel. That's one. Number 2, we have lived divided lives ever since. We call it us versus them mentality. Number 3, vitriolic rhetoric exists in the media, in social media, and on the internet. Way too much. And number 4, we live in a place where guns are too readily available and too often used. So how did this happen? You take that little recipe and you can concoct something that is absolutely mind-blowing. And a disaster waiting to happen. So how do we change? How do we respond? How do you and I respond to this? Take your hand right now and pat your heart. That's where you start to change right there. That's where I start to change right here. That's where you start to change right there. Now pat your head. Tap your mind. Hopefully it starts to move there. Hopefully we start to, don't hit it too hard. And then lastly, just reach the hand out like this. Because this is the motion right here. We go from having a change of heart to having a change of mind to then reaching out our hands and actually doing something about this in the world. So last point, here's my suggestion. I think we do it in small ways. Small ways. It has to be in the day-to-day. It has to be in the small ways. It has to be the change of heart that moves to the mind, that moves to the head. It has to be in small ways. So here's your challenge. We've been given something. You're going to be given something the next couple of weeks as you walk out of here, something to do, something to hang on to. We have a table in the back that has thank you notes on it. It has a stamp already on it. We're going to make this as easy as possible. Our secretary has made some beautiful thank you cards. I want to invite you to take one. We got other people that are going to be coming to church today. Take one. And write a thank you note to somebody this week. Listen, and don't write it to me. I feel your appreciation. I know you love me. I don't want 100 cards. All right? Think about somebody in your life who needs to be appreciated. Bless them. Gift them in a small way this week. Make the light a little bit brighter because you know Jesus and because we're told to give thanks in all circumstances. Amen? Amen.